It was an early summer night in Springfield, Missouri, June 6, 1992. The small city of just over 140,000 residents had the kind of quiet charm people sought out for a safer, slower pace of life. Rows of modest homes stretched along tree-lined streets, the hum of air conditioners filling the humid air and the occasional bark of a dog breaking the silence. It was graduation weekend, and the city's high school seniors were out celebrating milestones and futures that seemed as bright as the streetlights guiding them home. Among them were Suzanne "Susie" Streeter and Stacy McCall, both 18 years old, friends who had just crossed the threshold into adulthood. They had spent their evening at several graduation parties, mingling with classmates, laughing, making plans for the summer ahead. Around 2 a.m., instead of staying at a friend's house as originally planned, the two girls decided to return to Susie's home to sleep. Her mother, Cheryl Levitt, 47, had the house to herself, and it seemed the simpler choice. It was the kind of decision you'd expect on a carefree night, casual, inconsequential. That night, all three women, Susie, Stacy, and Cheryl, went into the modest one-story home at 1717 East Elmar Street. And by morning, it was as though they had vanished off the face of the earth. The first thing you need to know about this story is how ordinary the house looked in those first few hours. When friends arrived later that morning, the front door was unlocked. The cars belonging to Susie, Stacy, and Cheryl were still parked neatly outside. Purses sat on the living room floor. Cigarettes and lighters were there, untouched. The family dog, a little Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, roamed the house, agitated but unharmed. There were no screams, no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It was as though someone had simply erased them. Over the next days, weeks, and decades, what became known as the Springfield 3 case would cast a long shadow over this quiet Midwestern city. A mystery that defied logic, consumed lives, and haunted a community searching desperately for answers. This is that story. The morning of June 7th, 1992, dawned hot and humid in Springfield. At around 9 a.m., Stacy McCall's close friend, Janelle Kirby, and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, arrived at 1717 East Elmar Street. The plan had been to meet up with Susie and Stacy and all drive to a water park together for a day of celebration. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Both Susie's and Cheryl's cars were in the driveway, along with Stacy's. A light shone faintly from inside, but when Janelle knocked, no one answered. They tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house felt eerily still. The first thing Janelle noticed was Cinnamon, the little Yorkie, darting around, nervous and barking. In the living room, 3 purses lay on the floor, each belonging to one of the women. Susie's cigarettes and lighter were on a table nearby, items she never went far without. The beds appeared slept in. The television in the bedroom was left on, static hissing quietly into the warm air. A glass lampshade on the porch light outside had been shattered, the glass swept up and neatly piled. There were no signs of violence. No blood, no overturned furniture. And yet, no sign of Susie, Stacy, or Cheryl. Janelle and Mike began calling out their names, moving from room to room, half expecting to find them asleep or getting ready. But the house was empty. Concern quickly turned to confusion, then unease. Janelle began phoning other friends, hoping someone had heard from the women. No one had. One of the strangest details surfaced when Janelle checked the answering machine. She heard a strange, garbled voicemail. It was hard to make out, muffled, almost nonsensical, but it unnerved her enough that she accidentally erased it. Not knowing what else to do, Janelle and Mike stayed at the house for hours, waiting, pacing. Others began to stop by as word spread. By afternoon, as more family and friends showed up, the number of people walking through the house grew, along with the possibility of critical evidence being inadvertently trampled or erased. When police finally arrived later that day, the crime scene had already been hopelessly contaminated. The 3 women were gone. Everything else was still there. Before delving deeper, it's important to understand who the Springfield 3 were. 3 women, each with her own story, suddenly intertwined by a tragedy no one could have imagined. Cheryl Levitt, 47, was a single mother who worked as a hairdresser. Friends and clients described her as warm, friendly, and meticulous. She loved her home, the modest ranch-style house on East Elmar, and she poured her energy into keeping it neat and inviting. Cheryl was known to be cautious, even a little private, locking her doors religiously and looking out for her teenage daughter. Her daughter, Suzanne Streeter, was 19, just graduated from Kickapoo High School. Known as Susie to friends and family, she was spirited and independent, with blonde hair and an easy smile. Like many teens, she could be strong-willed, but those close to her said she was also loyal and funny, with plans to start cosmetology school later that summer. Alongside her that night was Stacy McCall, also 18. Stacy was soft-spoken and kind, the middle child in a close-knit family. She was described as sweet-natured and responsible, with a shy but sunny demeanor that drew people to her. That weekend, she was caught up in the same swirl of graduation excitement, looking forward to a senior trip to a water park the next day. The three women shared a fleeting sense of normalcy that evening. A mother and daughter unwinding at home, a friend spending the night after a long evening of parties and laughter. Each of them left behind signs of an ordinary night. Cheryl's car parked just so, Stacy's overnight bag in the corner, Susie's favorite cigarettes left untouched. Even Cinnamon, the dog, was still in the house, confused and distressed but unharmed. There was nothing to suggest they had packed up or planned to leave. In fact, it was clear they hadn't even gotten ready for bed properly. Beds were rumpled, but not fully slept in. Makeup and clothes were still out from the evening. Three women at three very different stages of life, bound by a single decision, to spend the night together in that house on East Elmar. And by morning, they were simply gone. No one knew it yet, but their names, Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall, would soon become inseparable in the minds of an entire city, synonymous with one of the most haunting mysteries in American true crime. June 6, 1992, was a milestone graduation day for the senior class at Kickapoo High School. Friends and family filled the school gymnasium, cheering as students walked across the stage to collect their diplomas. Among them were Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall, beaming in their caps and gowns, hugging classmates, posing for pictures. For most of them, the night felt like a turning point, the start of adulthood, the beginning of everything. After the ceremony, the celebrations began. Susie and Stacy planned to make the rounds to several graduation parties that night. They met up with friends, took photos, and stopped at least 3 houses. Witnesses remembered seeing them laughing, chatting, and making casual plans for the next day, a senior trip to Whitewater, a popular water park near Branson. Originally, the girls planned to sleep over at a friend's house after the parties. But when they arrived there late that night, the house was crowded with other graduates and overnight guests. The space felt cramped, and the atmosphere a little chaotic. Stacy, known for her shy and reserved nature, reportedly didn't feel comfortable staying. Susie agreed. They decided it would be better to just go back to Susie's house, where it would be quiet and they could rest. It was around 2 a.m. when they left their friend's house and drove to 1717 East Elmar Street. At that hour, the streets were empty, the city quiet under the soft glow of streetlights. Cheryl Levitt was already home. Earlier in the evening, she'd spoken to friends on the phone and was reportedly working on painting a piece of furniture. Like any other night, she was likely ready to wind down when Susie and Stacy arrived. Neighbors didn't report hearing anything unusual that night. No arguments, no cries for help, no sounds of struggle. Just the hum of a typical summer evening in suburban Missouri. If something happened to the 3 women during those next few hours, it happened without notice, without noise, silently enough that even those who lived just a few feet away slept through it. For Susie and Stacy, graduation night had been a blur of parties and laughter, one final carefree night before adulthood set in. No one imagined it would be the last time anyone would see them. When Springfield police finally arrived at 1717 East Elmar Street, hours after family and friends had already combed through the house, what they encountered was as frustrating as it was unsettling. The front door was unlocked. The porch light's glass globe had been shattered, but someone had swept up the broken pieces and left them neatly in a pile on the steps. Inside, everything seemed almost too ordinary. 3 purses sat together on the living room floor, their contents undisturbed. Cigarettes, car keys, and Stacy's overnight bag were all still there. Susie's car, a red Ford Escort, was parked outside next to her mother's Corsica and Stacy's Toyota Corolla. In the bedroom, the beds appeared slept in, but not properly made. Makeup was left out, clothes hung over chairs. On the television in Cheryl's room, a weather report played on low volume, the screen flickering into an empty room. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was obviously broken or overturned. Yet there were small details that didn't sit right. Cinnamon, the Yorkshire Terrier, was noticeably agitated, darting between rooms and barking at visitors. And then there was the phone line. Janelle Kirby told police about a strange voicemail she'd heard earlier that morning when checking the answering machine. To her, it sounded muffled and disturbing. Something about the tone chilled her. In her nervousness, she erased it by mistake, eliminating what could have been a critical piece of evidence. Police carefully dusted for fingerprints, took photographs, and tried to reconstruct the final moments of that night. But almost immediately, they were confronted with a problem. Too many people had already been inside. Friends, family members, and even curious neighbors had come and gone throughout the morning and afternoon, walking through rooms, tidying up, moving items without realizing they might be disturbing evidence. Whatever faint trail the perpetrator may have left behind was likely trampled. Officers interviewed neighbors, but no one reported hearing anything unusual. One neighbor recalled hearing a dog barking late at night, but nothing more. There was no ransom note, no clear motive, no forced entry. From a moment they disappeared, the case seemed to defy categorization. 3 women gone without a trace. A home left in perfect disarray. Just enough to hint that something terrible had happened, yet nothing to say what it was. In the hours and days after the disappearance, the Springfield Police Department began a full-scale investigation. But from the start, they were playing catch-up. By the time detectives secured the home, as many as 10 to 20 people had already walked through it, unintentionally contaminating what might have been a pristine crime scene. Fingerprints overlapped, footprints blurred, and potential evidence had been moved or handled. Nevertheless, investigators began working methodically. They interviewed everyone who had been at the house that morning. Janelle Kirby and Mike Henson recounted arriving around 9 a.m., finding the unlocked door, the agitated dog, and the eerie stillness. Other friends and family confirmed the timeline, establishing that the women were last seen leaving a graduation party shortly before 2 a.m. Police also spoke with neighbors. One woman claimed to have heard a strange, muffled scream sometime in the early morning hours, but nothing loud or distinct enough to draw her outside. Another recalled seeing a van parked near the house earlier in the night, though she couldn't recall the make, model, or license plate. Officers canvassed the surrounding area, checking nearby homes and businesses for any sign of the women. Flyers were printed and distributed within 24 hours. Local media picked up the story almost immediately. 3 women missing from their own home, with no signs of struggle, was too chilling to ignore. By Monday morning, the case had already drawn statewide attention. Search parties were organized, combing through wooded areas, fields, and abandoned properties around Springfield. Police called in cadaver dogs and helicopters, hoping to find even the smallest clue. They also worked their way through possible motives. Robbery? Unlikely. Nothing of value was taken. Domestic dispute? There were no known conflicts. Abduction? But by whom, and why 3 women at once? Detectives turned their attention to the men in the women's lives, ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, even clients of Cheryl's salon. Everyone was questioned. Some were polygraphed. No solid leads emerged. The deeper investigators looked, the less sense it made. It was as though the 3 had simply vanished into the humid June night, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a community on edge. For police, the case was already proving to be among the most baffling they'd ever encountered, and the evidence, such as it was slipping through their fingers. In the absence of hard evidence, theories about what happened to Springfield 3 quickly multiplied. Investigators pursued several leads in the weeks following the disappearance. Each one seemed promising at first, and each ended in frustration. One of the earliest theories was that the women had been abducted by someone they knew, someone they let into the house willingly. The unlocked door and lack of struggle suggested there hadn't been forced entry. But who would they trust enough to let in at that hour? Police questioned ex-boyfriends and acquaintances. Susie had reportedly been dating someone casually, and Cheryl's ex-husband was located and interviewed. But nothing solid emerged. None of the men in their circles had means, motive, or opportunity that investigators could prove. Another theory involved a stranger, an opportunistic intruder who entered the home and managed to control 3 people at once without attracting attention. The broken porch light lent some weight to this idea, suggesting perhaps someone deliberately darkened the entryway to conceal themselves. Some pointed to the possibility of a stalker. Cheryl had recently expressed concern of friends about someone bothering her. In the weeks before the disappearance, she'd mentioned receiving odd phone calls at home and at the salon, but there was no clear suspect tied to those incidents. Then there was the theory surrounding a convicted criminal named Robert Craig Cox. Cox, who was living in Springfield at the time, had a violent history and a disturbing demeanor. He claimed to know what happened to the women, but refused to say anything more. Investigators couldn't link him to the scene, and his statements were too vague and inconsistent to hold up in court. Rumors also swirled about a van, a mysterious vehicle allegedly seen near the Levitt home that night. Several witnesses described a strange green or light-colored van in the area, and one even reported seeing a man cleaning it out in the days after. Police impounded similar vehicles and followed that trail, but it went nowhere. As the weeks turned into months, the theories piled up, but none could be proved and none brought the women home. In a case so devoid of answers, even the most implausible possibilities seemed worth considering. Had they been abducted and taken far from Springfield? Were they victims of a random act of violence or a carefully planned crime? With no bodies, no ransom, no confession, and no clear evidence, detectives were left with a chilling reality. Nearly every theory was possible, and none was definitive. As the investigation dragged on, the Springfield Police Department was inundated with tips. Some came from concerned citizens who genuinely thought they had seen something. Others came from attention seekers, or worse, people who seemed to take a cruel kind of pleasure in dangling false hope. One of the most talked about leads came from a man who claimed to know where the women were buried. He directed police to a concrete parking garage under construction just outside the city. The theory was chilling, that the women had been murdered and entombed in freshly poured concrete before dawn. For a time, the garage site became the focus of media attention. Police brought in ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The radar reportedly showed 3 anomalies under the slab, roughly human-sized. But the cost and logistical challenge of tearing up the garage was daunting, and there was no definitive proof. The lead fizzled out, leaving the city with more questions and lingering suspicion. Then there were the psychics. Several self-proclaimed clairvoyants approached the families and police, offering visions of where the women might be. Some described wooded areas. Others mentioned water or caves. None of their information led to a meaningful discovery. Hoaxes took their toll on everyone involved. At one point, a caller claimed the women were being held in a farmhouse outside Springfield and demanded money for their release. Police investigated, only to find an abandoned building with no connection to the case. Another man walked into the police station to confess to their murders, only to admit hours later he had made the story up. Every false lead cost the department time, resources, and morale. Even so, detectives followed up on nearly every tip, desperate for a breakthrough. Years later, some of the original investigators admitted that the volume of misinformation made it nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction. For the families of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, each tip brought a fleeting moment of hope, followed by heartbreak. It became clear that the case had taken on a life of its own, drawing not just genuine concern, but also the darker impulses of those who sought to exploit it. As the years passed, the tips slowed, but the hoaxes and the pain they caused remained part of the case's legacy. In the months and years after the disappearance, the case of the Springfield 3 left an indelible mark on the city. What had once felt like a safe, close-knit community was suddenly shrouded in suspicion and fear. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked began checking the deadbolt twice at night. Porch lights stayed on later. Parents gave their children stern warnings about strangers and about trust. For the people of Springfield, the mystery was everywhere. Missing persons posters bearing the 3 women's faces hung in shop windows, on telephone poles, and inside churches. Their smiles became icons of loss, symbols of an innocence that now seemed irretrievably gone. At Cheryl's former salon, clients still spoke of her in the present tense at first, before their voices quieted and their eyes fell to the floor. Friends of Susie and Stacy found it difficult to talk about that night without revisiting their own choices. What if they'd insisted the girls stay at the original house? What if they'd noticed something strange at the parties? Survivors' guilt lingered long after hope began to fade. The house at 1717 East Delmar became a grim landmark. Curious onlookers sometimes slowed down as they drove by, glancing at the quiet home where 3 lives had simply vanished. For others, it was too painful to even look at. Even beyond Springfield, the story spread. Newspapers and television specials turned the case into a national mystery. It became one of the most notable missing persons cases of the 1990s, drawing comparisons to other unsolved crimes and fueling countless books, documentaries, and late-night theories. But to the people who lived there, it was more than just a mystery. It was a wound. Even now, more than 3 decades later, some longtime residents still talk about it in hushed tones. For them, it wasn't just the crime, it was the not knowing. The way a normal night could suddenly, inexplicably, open into a void from which no answers would ever emerge. For Springfield, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains not only an unsolved crime, but a defining moment. A reminder that sometimes the darkest chapters are the ones you can never close. Today, more than 30 years later, the case of the Springfield 3 remains officially open, but no closer to resolution. Over the decades, detectives have revisited old leads and pursued new ones. Advances in forensic technology, like DNA analysis, have been applied to what little evidence remains. Yet nothing definitive has ever surfaced. The house on East Delmar was eventually sold. New owners moved in, painting over the walls and replacing the carpet. But for those who remember, it will always be the house where 3 women disappeared into silence. In 1997, police publicly named Robert Craig Cox as a person of interest again, after he gave an interview suggesting he knew the women were dead and implying their bodies would never be found. When pressed, he refused to elaborate. Without physical evidence, authorities were unable to charge him. He remains incarcerated on unrelated charges, his cryptic comments lingering like a shadow over the investigation. Other theories have faded over time. The parking garage tip remains unverified. The van sightings never yielded a suspect. The possibility of a stranger abduction is still considered, but no definitive link has ever been established. For the families, the pain of not knowing is perhaps the hardest part. Each holiday, each birthday passes without closure. Every anniversary brings fresh media attention and another round of questions, but no answers. Over the years, they have made appeals to the public, hoping someone, somewhere, might remember a detail or find the courage to come forward. The case file remains thick, filled with hundreds of tips, interviews, and dead ends. Detectives assigned to the case still carry it in the backs of their minds, aware that even the smallest piece of information could change everything. Yet the reality is sobering. Statistically, the odds of solving a case grow slimmer with each passing year. Still, the names Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall have not been forgotten. In Springfield, their story is a quiet reminder that even in the most ordinary places, the most inexplicable things can happen. And until the day they are found, or the truth is finally revealed, their absence will continue to haunt those who knew them, and even those who didn't. 3 women. No answers. The story of the Springfield 3 is not just about what happened, but about what didn't. No phone call came in the dead of night to explain. No ransom note appeared in the mailbox. No anonymous tip ever led investigators to the truth. The house at 1717 East Elmar sits quietly now, just another modest home on a quiet suburban street. But for those who remember, it remains a place where time stopped, a place that asks questions no one has been able to answer. How could 3 women disappear so completely? Why were there no screams, no struggle, no evidence? And most haunting of all, is someone, even now, carrying the secret of what happened that night? For the families, and for Springfield, the case is more than a mystery. It's a wound that never closed. Perhaps somewhere, there's still a clue, still a voice waiting to be heard, still a sliver of hope that one day, the book on this dark chapter can finally close. But for now, the pages remain open. What do you think of today's story? What dark chapter should we open next? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter.